Okay, so in the 1650s, the Europeans came to the very southern tip of Africa, and that was primarily a consequence of the trading routes because people had to sail around the Horn.
Yes.
Right, and they set up this settlement as a refreshment station, you said, for the sailors, and that would be the European sailors who were starting to trade in India and so forth.
Exactly, yes.
And in Asia.
And also to service the ships, building ships, repairing ships, and so forth, yes. So that they started there in 1652. Eventually, they had what we call the Vryburgers or the Freeburgers, which was that they were employees of the Dutch East India Company. Some of them were then released from their contracts so that they could become farmers, so that they could start developing an economy. And so there were some clashes with, for example, the Bushmen already there in the Cape between the Europeans and the Bushmen, but there was also examples of trading and cooperation and so forth.
Right, so that's similar to what happened in North America.
Yeah.
Like there were lots of peaceful and productive interactions between the natives and the Europeans, and it also depended on which Europeans. So the Cree in Canada were much more likely to ally with the English, for example, than with the French. And so these things were very complicated.
We had the same dynamics in South Africa with the Afrikaner people and the English as well, yes. But just to get to that point, it's unfortunate that thinking about history tends to overestimate or overemphasize the conflict and downplay the cooperation, because conflict is more newsworthy, you could say. So when we think about history, we think about war and conflict, but we forget the cooperation part. That's very important.
Right.
And so that was about the time when the Zulu people were settling in what is today KwaZulu-Natal, and that calls our people in what is the Eastern Cape, closer to where the Afrikaners or the Proto-Afrikaners were. And
so when did the Bantu start moving south? And why hadn't they done that before?
I'm not sure why they haven't done that before, but from what I know, there was conflict up north in Africa, and there was nomadic tribes and some groups
So they were pushed down as a consequence of intertribal warfare in their own lands.
Yes.
It's still surprising, isn't it, that so much of Africa was essentially unsettled. I mean, I know the Bushmen were there, but there weren't very many of them. And it's also a lifestyle that can't support that huge a population. It's pre-agricultural lifestyle.
Yep.
So, I mean, there weren't very many human beings 100,000 years ago. So, okay. And so, all right. So the Europeans start settling in the southernmost part of Africa. It's the Dutch East India Company. It's primarily for trade. The employees of that company get acclimated to Africa. They realize that there's immense productive farmland there. Like I read, for example, I know Uganda's farther north, but Uganda has enough arable land to feed all of Africa with no problem. Yeah. And a water table that's 200 feet below the surface of the country that's virtually everywhere in the country. Right, so God only knows how many people Africa could support if it was well managed.
Yes, which is why we have some of the best farmers in South Africa today. So in terms of the history, then one major event was with the Napoleonic Wars. We sometimes joke as the Afrikaner people, we say we skipped the Enlightenment because we have this joke. We say in Europe they were reading Jean-Jacques Rousseau while we were hunting elephants.
That was probably a better use of time than reading Jean-Jacques Rousseau anyways.
Yeah, so but that's important because I think it in a way shaped our culture in a particular way, and which is why the Afrikaner people at least are much more conservative, much more religious than many of our friends in Europe.
Should outline a little bit probably too the conflict between the Dutch, the Boers, and the English.
Yes, I want to get to that now.
Okay. So we've got the setup now. So really, what happened in South Africa was that there was a relatively small population of pre-agricultural tribesmen, the Bushmen, who were very ethnically distinct from this. Let's call them Central Africans for the time being.
Yes,
and that in around 1650, let's say to 1750, there was an influx of Bantu speaking people who were larger from the north, and there was an influx of Europeans from...
It was a bit before, I think they came in before the Europeans came, but they were coming in from the north. In the same century, you could say. Okay, in the same century, anyways. Yeah. And so the Bushmen were starting to feel pressure from an invasion, so to speak, from the north, and also an influx from the south. Yes.
Okay, so that's a more accurate... And none of this was agricultural to begin with.
Yes.
Right. So now were the Bantu also interested in agricultural settlement?
Yes, they were less nomadic than the Bushmen. The Bushmen were more nomadic. They moved around much more. And the Bantu groups were also in a sense nomadic, but they settled in, like the Zulus built the Zulu kingdom in KwaZulu-Natal, in the eastern part of the country. And they had more degrees of settlement.
Okay, so we're also seeing an anthropological struggle in the broader sense between the archaic mode of human existence, which was nomadic hunter-gatherer, and the developing agricultural and settled communities. Some of them were black in Africa and some of them were white.
Yep.
And so now we've got at least a three-way conflict going on, not counting the conflicts between inside the groups.
Yes.
Okay. And so by mid-1700s, what's the status of the white settlements in South Africa?
So it developed, it grew, and the borders shifted out especially toward the east. Then the reason why I mentioned the Enlightenment is because after the French Revolution, the Napoleonic Wars took place.
Specify the time frame.
1810.
Yep.
And that's when the British came to colonize the Cape, partly as a result of the wars in Europe. And so we had some battles with the British, the Battle of Blouberg, the Battle of Meisenberg, and eventually the Cape was colonized.
Right, so that's while the Brits are really expanding their empire.
Yes.
And so now they come into what's now a European settlement in South Africa, and the battle for dominion is between Europeans. So what motivated the English to show up in South Africa, per se, in the 1800s? You said it was in the aftermath of Napoleonic Wars, but it was part of the colonial expansion, no doubt.
Yeah,
it's a trade issue as well, I presume.
I think it's all of that. It was part of the British expanding the British Empire, the strategic importance of the southern point of the African continent, especially in terms of trade. That was before the...
Well, the richness of the land. There's gold. Was gold discovered by then?
No, not yet.
Not yet, okay.
Yeah. And so they settled, which led to the great event in our history that many people say is the event during which we became a people, which was the Great Trek. So some of the Afrikaner people or the Dutch-speaking peoples in the Cape at the time felt that they cannot be governed by another nation. They were very, very aggrieved by the idea that someone came in from another continent and
took over.
Yeah. And they wanted to be free. And so they eventually opted to move into the interior of South Africa, which was a very dangerous thing to do because people didn't know what they would find in the interior. They sent in what they call the commission track. They sent in some scouts, and actually the scouts came back and said that they found some people in certain areas, but largely speaking, there were vast open tracts of land. Because what's also important, this is again why the history of land ownership is so complex. That was shortly after the Mfecane genocide, which was a genocide. Some figures estimate that about 1 million people were killed as a result of Zulu expansionism and a conflict between the Zulu king and Mfecane or Msilikatsi, who was I think he was a soldier in the Zulu kingdom, and he eventually had the Matabeles or the Ndebele people. And it was expansionist wars, and it spread out throughout the southern part of Africa, and there was mass extermination campaigns. So the scouts came back and they said in some places they found peoples living, in some places there was just no one, and in some places they just found bones, skeletons.
So there was evidence that there was good reason and possibility to get the hell away from the English and move the British and to move farther north and into the central parts of South Africa.
Yeah, towards where...
What sort of size geographical area are we talking about?
South Africa is about twice the size of Texas. So it's a pretty big country. Compared to the US, it's small.
Right.
You could say it's the size of Western Europe if you take away Spain. So it's a pretty big country.
Right, okay. So there was plenty of northward geographical area to move towards.
Yes.
And how many Boers, what year was the trek?
The 1830s.
1830s. And how many Boers participated in the trek?
I think about 2,000, if I recall.
Okay.
It was a fairly small group initially.
Right. And they used wagons and moved like that?
Yes, ox wagons.
Right, so it's kind of like the settlement of the American West in that way.
Very, very similar. The Afrikaner story is remarkably similar to the American story. It's also, we had our wars with the British. It's remarkably similar. Our interactions with local communities, the track towards the interior. It's a fascinating story, just how comparable it is. Also, culturally speaking.
Right. So there was plenty of vacant land in the western U.S. when the pioneers went westward. There was occupied land as well. There's still plenty of vacant land in the western U.S., like plenty, although a lot of it's desert. And so I suspect that, although I don't know this for sure, but I expect that there was more habitation in North America than there was in South Africa at that time. I guess I really don't know, because I don't know how extensive the Bantu settlements might have been. But you said that was also complicated by the fact that there was a genocide and that many, many people were wiped out. And of course, the situation in North America was complicated by the fact of the mass deaths that were a consequence of the illnesses that spread across North America, like a plague, actually like 3 plagues. And so, well, all that to just say how complicated these things are. Okay, so these 2,000 people spread north, and then what was the consequence of that?
So they, again, going back to the issue of conflict versus cooperation, there were many examples of cooperation and treaties, dozens of treaties that were signed with local tribes cooperating, but there was also conflict. And one of the most significant, or the most well-known battle, was the Battle of Blood River, which was when the voortrekkers, as they were known, which essentially means pioneer, also another similarity. It means those who go out ahead. They were known as the voortrekkers. And so they had conflict with the Ndebele people of Msilikatsi, this soldier from the Zulu who was part of this,
So he was a rebel in the Bantu.
Yeah. He had conflict with the Zulu king. And then they also had conflict with the Zulus. And one of the battles, I should just mention this in passing, was the Battle of Vegkop, where the voortrekkers were attacked by the Ndebeles of Msilikatsi. But it was an ambush, they didn't expect it. And so it was men and women and children who had to defend themselves. And it's an important part of our story, because the women were there in the field next to the men with their voorlaaiers, as they called it, these front-loading rifles, the very sort of primitive guns that they had at the time. And they had to defend themselves as they were attacked. The